snowy weather. And we really want to thank the presenters for making it from very different places, from Chicago, from California, from Lebanon as well, from the Northeast. So once again, we really are honored that you made it here. We hope to have a wonderful conference. I also want to thank Maria and Zainab for helping me organize this conference. One of the reasons I personally was interested in organizing this conference is being the opportunity to work with both of them. So thank you, Maria and Zainab. So let's go ahead and start this next session. It's going to be called Structural and Literary Constructions in the Qur'an. We have two presenters, so they'll be speaking for about 15-20 minutes each, and then we'll break for lunch. And lunch will be provided complimentary to all participants. Our first presenter is Anne Sylvia Agoligo, and she will be presenting on the textual commentaries inside the Quranic text, words spoken inside, contributing to self-referentiality. Some words about her: she graduated in 2010 from the University of Aix in France. Her PhD was on self-referentiality in the Qur'an, and now she's currently a lecturer at the University of Groningen in the Netherlands. Please join me in welcoming Sylvia.
Can you hear me well? Okay. So my talk this morning is about what I call it words spoken aside in the Quran. I will explain right now what it's about. But first of all, I want to say that the scholarly approaches to the Quran, as we saw already this morning, now we have scholarly approaches to the Quran that tend to, there's a renewal, and those researchers tend to study now, try to study the contents and the contents and the meaning of the text, but in a new way. We have a kind of renewal, not only studying from the study of the vocabulary, but as well from the study of the argumentation in the text. And I think this is a very important trend in contemporary Quranic studies, trying to look what is the meaning the text is trying to convey to the addresses. And this is always related to the idea that there is a voice or author or somebody or something trying to convey one message to addresses. So trying to reflect on this idea. Who is talking to whom, saying what? So this is the general frame of all those studies, which I think are very important. And this is in this framework that I'm situating my own paper. The focus is about a specific textual feature that I noticed, and I think many of you probably noticed in the Quranic text, which can be described as words spoken aside, as in a theater play. By this I mean, of course, everybody has in mind some kind of theater play where you have actors acting on the stage together, and then suddenly one of the actors turns to the audience and kind of says something to the audience that the other actors are not supposed to hear. Huh? So it's kind of, we are playing, and suddenly I'm telling you, something, either something secret that only you would know, you the audience and me the actor, and not the others, or I'm explaining something, giving you the keys to understand the situation. And so, I think in the Quranic text we have several examples of this kind of tool or rhetorical tool. So I call it words spoken aside, and I'm going to first give examples of this, and then try to analyze them, try to see how they are working. So, first, how can I define them? We can see that they create a break in the flow of the ongoing discourse. Discourse is going on, suddenly there's a break. And in this, I think they join what we call in Arabic iltifat. There's a change in the pronoun, for example. And suddenly they are so addressed to an audience, and this can be explicit when there is the text is saying you or watch or do this. There is an audience, or sometimes it's not really clear and it's more implicit. And the third thing is that it's commenting the situation or presenting an opinion about something that is going on or something that is said. And there are, of course, different degrees in those words spoken aside. Some are very clearly spoken aside, some are more those three characters, those three features of are a bit less present. Anyway, so but first, I list the different places where different passages where those words spoken aside appear. First, some are in the narratives of the past. This is the most common thing. That a story is going on about the past, and suddenly the text, the voice of the text changes, and you have a comment. For example, we have in Surah 6, 83, for example, like this story about Abraham. And Abraham's people argued with him, and he said, "How can you argue with me about God when He has guided me, etc.? And then tell me if you know the answer, which sides are more right, etc." It is those who have faith and do not mix their faith with idolatry who will be secure if they, and it is they who are rightly guided. And suddenly the voice turns and said, "Such was the argument we gave to Abraham against these people. We raise Imran, whoever will, your Lord is always on one side." So suddenly the voice is turned to you to explain you what just happened between Abraham and his people. Another example also is about the people of Thamud. This is in Surah 54. And the people of Thamud rejected the warnings. They say, "What? A man? Why should we follow a lone man from amongst ourselves? That would be misguided, quite insane. Would a remembrance be given to him alone out of all of us? No, he is an insolent liar." And then the voice says, "Tomorrow they will know who is the insolent liar." So again, the voice's intervention in the story to tell you, to make you understand, to tell you who is bad in the story. Same thing with the long surah use of the story about David, that you know, Surah 12. In the middle, in the end of the surah, there's a big kind of explanation of the surah. But in the middle of it as well, when Joseph is in his story saying, "Put me in charge of the nation's storehouse, I will manage them prudently and carefully." And suddenly the story stops and says, "In this way we settled Joseph in that land to live wherever he wished. We grant our place to wherever we will, and do not fail to reward those who live with excellence." And then the story goes on. So then the text goes, "Joseph came and presented himself before him," etc. So it's really a break in the middle of the story to explain to us what is going on. Okay, second type of passages within this category of descriptions. So it's a bit the same as in stories of the past. But for an example here from Surah 39. Well, those who rejected the truth will be led to hell in their thrones. When they arrive, its gates will open and its keepers will say to them, etc., etc., etc. And then the sentence of punishment will it will be said, enter the gates of hell, there you will remain. And then the voice said, how evil is the evil abode of the arrogant? Sorry for my accent. But then, so the voice comments on how bad is the state, but with the Arabic word gitsa, so how bad. And then the same story with the dwellers of heaven, and then the text turns to you and tells you how excellent is the reward of those who labor. So again, the voice is telling you what you have to understand from this. There's words spoken aside in prescriptions as well. I won't quote everything, but just, for example, there is something said about fasting, and then suddenly, these are the bounds set by God. For example. And then another type of passages where you have those words spoken aside is in the description of nature. For example, about the sky, about fruits and everything, and then something turns to you telling you, watch their fruits as they grow and ripen. In all this, there are signs for those who believe. So it explains to you that this description of nature is meant to be a sign, etc. And then the last type of passage is what I call polemics in the present time of the text. By this I mean polemics that seem to be going on at the moment of the time of the prophet. Or you all know this. But they are not so much strongly in an aside, because they don't represent a clear break. It's not like one story and suddenly break. It's more an exchange of arguments. And in the middle of there, your voice telling you how to understand these polemics. Okay? Now I go to my second part, which is about the function of those words spoken aside. So here, we go back to what I said at the beginning, that we have to consider that there is a voice talking to some emphasis, and try to think about this. There's 4 features of those words spoken aside. The first one is that there is no neutrality. The voice is clearly saying something either very positive or very negative. There is no middle ground. And it's always, I'm not sure about the English word, in French it's connotative, I think, or connotative, but like, it always has a color. It's very positive. Okay, and for example, the use of pizza or pizza that we just talked about, how bad it is, or plays a role, for example, and there are many other words like why, so who to every line sinful person, for example, so it explains to you that it's very negative what those persons just did, etc. And also something like kaifa, how come that, or kam, how many people did this, or setna, how dreadful was what they did, etc. So you have a lot of those words that come to give positive or negative. And so the voice is never neutral. It's the voice goes inside of negative, neutral. The second feature is that it's those words spoken aside say, not all the time, but many times, that things that it's talking about are a sign or something to remember. So it's the use of the word ayah, sign, and also dik, something to remember. I don't know how far yeah, because I will skip, because I was trying to explain things about ayah and etc. But basically, the idea that it's a sign, so it's related to a miraculous sign, linked to the mission of a prophet, but it's a sign. It means that it's not, it's meant to point at something else, not at what is there, but about something else. This thing is there to show you well. So basically, by this sign and remembrance, the words spoken aside tell you why they are here. They are here for show something else, for the people to think about something else and to remember about it. Okay, I don't live down here. The third feature of those words spoken beside him is their authoritativeness. By this, well, try to think about this voice of the text. Of course, there is the idea that the whole Qur'an is from God. This is a general idea, and I'm not talking here from a critical point of view or a belief point of view, but from the text. The text says, because I'm staying in the text says that the Qur'an is from God. So, okay, the whole voice is from God. But there's another level, and I think we are all aware of this double level, and the other level is that even if the voice is from God, then there's an important image. The voice, sometimes it's the voice of the openness of mind. And when we read the text or we listen to the text, we know that even if it's supposed to be the voice of God, within this it's like the voice of God quoting the voice of other people. But, and sometimes the voice of what he's supposed to say, etc. Sometimes it's God's voice in the second level, yeah? It's clearly supposed to be the voice of God. But sometimes it's this voice in those words spoken aside that doesn't seem to be exactly God's voice, again on the second level, but the voice of the omniscient narrator, or the voice of the text that knows everything. The narrator of the text, or that knows everything about this text, and that knows where this text is going and what it wants to say to you. So, because of this all-knowing position, this voice has authority. Because if you listen to the text, you say, okay, you feel this is the voice that is going to explain to me. So you submit to this authority. It seems to work like this. And yeah, I've done quotations about this, but let's skip. And then the fourth point is the fourth feature about those words spoken aside, is that this voice is kind of creating some intimacy or emotion sharing, because this is like the actor that turns to people. The listener or the reader, when the voice turns to him, he feels that he shares the secret with the voice. So he feels implied, and he feels that he feels the emotion and the feelings of the voice, so to speak. So if the voice is so upset, or if God is so upset, and this exasperation and everything, so there's big feeling. So the voice listens to this, the listener listens to this and thinks, okay, this is terrible, so I have to do something. So the listener or the reader feels responsible, not for the trouble, but responsible to do something to go against this, to try to do something against this position where the voice is exasperated or something. So I think there's something very much related to emotions. I think so. And here again, there's a lot of the vocabulary from pizza, cam, all those words in Arabic that push. And also, there's some kind of, here the words like afala or la'alla, or which express some kind of the wish of the voice. So of course, from a theological point of view, we will not say the wish of God, because we say God knows that everything will happen, not only according to his, it's not his wish, it's his will. But the feeling that we get, like afala la'alla, oh, the voice is opening this, so I must do something to help. Yeah. So this is the feeling, can be the feeling of the listener or the reader. So if I have to finish, I wanted then, I had a third part about explaining how all this relates to self-referentiality, which is the way the Quran defines itself. So very briefly, first, all those features of the word spoken aside, so they push the reader or the listener to do something, but to do what? And then we have to go back to the general Quranic view and there are several things that the text is asking from the listener, from the reader, through those words spoken aside, but one of the main, as far as I can get, is to accept that, or to agree that this Quran is from God, is a revelation, and that it is the word of God, and you have to submit to it, and you have to believe. Because again, I don't have the time to say everything in detail now, but if you think, for example, this idea that it's only positive or negative, so you have only two possibilities. So you have to believe or not. There's no third possibility. So the voice is pushing in this direction. So this is about the role of the Quran. So this is about self-referentiality, because self-referentiality is the way the Quran not only describes itself, but also the way the Quran says what is its role in the life of the people. The self-referential discourse defines what the Quran is meant to be for the people. So those words spoken aside contribute to make the people, or the reader, or the listener, understand this role of the Quran and do it in their lives. So that's how I do it. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. Our next presenter is named Ahmed Al-Wisha, and he's assistant professor of philosophy at Pitzer College, which is in California, near Claremont. And he has written a book on Ibn Kamuna's Imitations, a 13th century text on natural philosophy and psychology. He'll be presenting today on dialectical disputation in the Quran. Please join me in welcoming Ahmed.
So I have a PowerPoint, and the reason why I'm using PowerPoint is because somewhat I would be more technical in presenting some arguments. So hopefully this will be So while we're fixing this, let me give you just some, because I have an extra minute now, let me give you some brief description of my project. My project is basically on the dialectical investigation of the Quran. Oh, good, we get it. This is project in progress, basically. And so, for the lack of time, basically.
Sorry, we can't hear. You have to speak directly in the mic.
Oh, okay. Did you hear me now?
Yes.
So much.
Carry the mic. Why don't you carry the mic here?
Reach it now. So my project basically on the dialectical disputation in the Quran, and this is project in progress. And for the lack of time, I'm going to focus on 4 elements on the dialectical disputation. First, I will start with the dialectic concept, and second, basically, I will briefly I will talk about the structure of the dialect, focus on the role of indexia. I will explain indexia in a second, and enthemium. Oh yes, that's actually it is way up to this. Yes, thank you. Yes, is that much better? Okay. And the third part basically would be in the informal rule of disputation in the Quran. And finally, I really am excited about this thing, is to share with you my finding on the syllogism, especially on the reductio ad absurdum. There's two types of syllogism I'm going to discuss today. So hopefully we'll be there. But before I get to this thing, let me give you a brief history about the tradition of dialect in the Quran in general. Investigating dialectical disputation in the Quran is not in itself a new approach. However, previous study on the subject from the classic period to this day have been unsuccessful in determining how the structure and the terms of the dialectical disputation actually make sense of the text. The majority of Muslim theologians in the classic period, such as Ibn Qudama, Fakhruddin Razi, Ibn al-Muzaffar, Najm al-Din al-Tufi, and Abd al-Rahman ibn al-Hanbali, studied dialectical disputation primarily to identify particular theological disposition and paid less or no attention to the role of dialectical disputation plays in the text. Likewise, philosophers on the other hand, such as Farabi, Ibn Sina, Ibn Rushd, Samarkandi, who were well acquainted with the Aristotelian work of dialectical, book of Topic and Rhetoric, made no attempt to examine the dialectic in the Quran argument as a whole. Rather, they merely made a few passing reference to the Quran dialectic in order to support some of their philosophical position. And this is, I guess, the case with the book the Fasl al-Maqal, when he makes some reference basically to the Quran to support some of his argument. Ghazali was an exception. Ghazali is the only philosopher in the classic period basically who used the logical structure to study the concept of jadal or dialect. And he is the first one who formulated some of this argument in his famous book, the Al-Qastat fil-Mizan. Most modern Islamic scholars investigated the dialectical tradition in relation to other predominant topics such as legal reasoning and the Quranic exegesis rather than study the tradition itself. And there's three main scholars in this thing. There's Larry Miller, who's very much focused on the philosophical tradition, and there is Cornell, she's focused on the theological tradition, the tradition of Kalam. And finally, basically, we have Gwen, which is really published a wonderful book on this subject, on the arguments on the related to Quran. But her arguments also focus very much on Ghazali argument and Najm al-Din al-Tufi. So that history basically, so I thought I will give different type of approach to the study of the jadal, that's the word for the dialectic in the Quran, and try to explore some of the aspect, and I'm here basically to share with you this thing. So let us start with the concept. The key concept basically, jadal, is that what's the key terms for the dialect. I'm going to explain more about as we move along with my presentation. There are 4 terms associated with jadal, and they really play a major role in explaining what the jadal is about. The first one is hujjah, burhan, bayan, and sultan mubin. If you look to these 3 terms basically, and examine these terms, they come and signify different type of aspect. In some cases they mean argument, proof, evidence. In some cases they don't mean any of this. In Qur'an, for example, in some cases in Surah Yusuf it means sign or something. Sultan Mubin, in some cases it means authority, clear authority. But basically most of these 4 terms is very much signify the concept of proof and evidence. And there's, when I examine these 4 terms, basically, I see there is a distinction in terms of the degree of certainty and the assertion. For example, Sultan Mubin is very strong in most cases. Burhan is weaker than Sultan Mubin because it's acquired demonstration. And actually, Burhan in the 8 times it comes in the Quran mostly indicated
it's the work of a human, not basically is produced by a human, is not something produced by God or any of that sort. I like Sultan Mubin al-Hujjah. Speaking of the starter, this is common knowledge, basically. There is long, well-established Greek tradition of Jadal, dialect. Aristotle wrote famous 2 books, the topic and rhetoric, dealing with the subject matter of dialect, and set the rule, actually, in almost 8 books is designed to that things. The rule of the questioner, the rule of the answer, and we have all of this thing. So there is well-established tradition of dialect already exists prior to Islam. That's way, way before Islam. And within this tradition, there are 2 aspects really important for us to learn about them in order to study when we come to study the dialect in the Quran, in my view. And one of them basically is the rule of the indexa. What is the indexa? In topic, basically, Aristotle argued that certain things have to be conceded, and that something other than the thing conceded must necessarily follow. He writes, accepted opinion are reputable, which are accepted by everyone, or by the majority, or by the wise. The indexia, basically, if there is dialect in any sense, in a religious sense, in a philosophical sense, it has to be, there are common or accepted belief. Without the accepted belief, it's impossible to have that, period. Because that's the condition. It has to be satisfied this condition. So it's come to my mind, and this has really been overlooked when people study the Jadal. What are these common or accepted beliefs in the Quran, especially when the Prophet Muhammad conducted numerous. I mean, the Quran actually is large part of the Quran is dialect. It's mostly dialect. So when the Prophet is debated with the Christian, with the Jewish people, with the pagan, what kind of common accepted belief? They have to have a common accepted belief. And my goal is not basically, of course, there's a comparative study, and people always point out to what the common belief between these things. But my focus is to identify them as a premises. Because the moment you identify them as a premises, then you really can move on and see where is the tension point and where is the disagreement. And this any rule of debate and argument. So it has to be there is a common accepted belief. And obviously, for the example, the verses I noted that with the Christian and Jewish, they all believe in afterlife, but now they claim who will be going to paradise or not. That's something that's been debatable. But it's the hardest part, and I will struggle with it for a long period of time, is to identify the premises with the polytheists or the pagans, because the accepted belief here is kind of different. It has to be based on the human reasoning. So in this verses, for example, I'm going to go over it again. Had God wanted, we would not have worshipped anything other than Him, nor would our Father. We would not have forbidden anything without our command from Him. This is very much based on human reasoning. If God has capacity, then we'll do that. Wow, 5 minutes, then I should wrap up quickly. Something related to the common belief, and I probably should, because I need to get to the circle. The Athenian, basically, it's the implicit premises. In every argument, in every, not just in the Quran, in any cases, if there is an argument, there's implicit premises and unstated premises. And so the question is like how we define and how we derive these or deduce these unstated premises. And the Quran actually, in the Quran, there is in most of the verses, or they have the type of syllogism, what we call the Athenian, which is there's an implicit. So there is a 3 rules basically we get from the Greek tradition that's helpful to do that. And these 3 cases, one should not deduce from remote premises that have no relation to intended conclusion. I don't have time to explain all these things, but I will go quick. One should choose premises that don't affect the logical completeness of the syllogism, and finally, it must be true. So this is the 3 basically rules. It has to be identified in order to deduce the type of implicit premises. And you see it in the legal system and in the tradition of fiqh. Always people try to plug in these implicit premises in the exegesis of the Quran when they try to explain it, so I'm going to skip quickly. Informal role of disputation in the Quran. By looking to all the arguments in the Quran, actually I deduced 3 rules. The first one is a proof or demonstration must produce to substantiate one's claim. That has to be demonstration. Second, to dispute, one must base his statement on knowledge and truth. And third, a disputation should only be conducted in the best possible way. The last one is very, very significant and it's really important. I mean, as a person studying philosophy, this is so beautiful. And I'm going to demonstrate how this is important in the next one. This is famous verses, and this is really making me always think. We have indeed put for mankind in this Quran every manner of smoking good, but man is the most disputatious of things. The most disputatious of things. So there is a propensity and there is a natural disposition within humankind, within us, to dispute. And that Quran is admit that type of nature. Now the Quran suggests there is 2 ways of dealing with that nature of disputation, because the ultimate goal is really to create it or to generate the element of persuasion. And in order to do that, it has to be this case of the propensity, it has to be satisfied at one point. And one way is really to invoke the rule C, the one I referred to, namely that a disputation should only be conducted in the best possible way. So if there's it has to be the condition met in the best possible way, then that kind of convincing and persuasion has to be generated within the 2 parties who's arguing this thing, and it's coming within. And this is very, very sophisticated actually. In the Greek tradition, there's a lot of talk about how you can generate that element within, not just from one, try to pursue the other. So that's very sophisticated. Another case is basically common in the Quran, basically is provided transcendental premises when you can see in the end of every argument of Jadal, basically Allahu A'lam, Allahu A'raf, Allahu Hakim. So basically is to draw to the divine attribute and to make the cases God is knowing, God's omniscient, God's willing, and by appealing to this thing, then that will be convincing in the metaphysical sense. Now, syllogism, the most common syllogism in the Quran is like always seen basically the hypothetical syllogism. And by the way, this is really just jargon and word we use in philosophy. It's not as sophisticated at all. Syllogism we use it every day in any regular life. But it's really significant when we see them in the Quran, when we see them in any text. It has to be you can really try to explore the reasoning and the study of these things. So syllogism is not that, syllogism is a condition is not that big a deal, but we see it often in the Quran, and especially we start إِذَا قَالَ إِنْ قَالَ. In many cases I present one of the cases here. But this is what I want to share with you. Reductio ad absurdum, it's very, very sophisticated, and I was absolutely surprised and shocked to discover that in the Quran exists. Reductio ad absurdum is developed later on by the Stoic, actually, way later on. It's been mentioned by Aristotle in prior analytic, but later on it's developed by Stoic. It's to start with the argument, basically, there is a truth proposition, and in order to prove the truth of this proposition, you provided a negation, and in the process you generated an element that the negation is being negated so the truth will be sustained. That's the whole point of the reductio ad absurdum. Now let's see how this works. This is famous verse basically went to. And he presents to us an example when forgetting his own creation. He said he will give life to bones while they have rotted away. He will give them life who created them for the first time, for he is knower of every creation. Is not he who created the heaven and earth able to create the like of them? Yes, it is so, and he is the knowing creator. Well, we want to basically establish the first one. And the Quran tried to argue when that person tried to challenge it. It's like, how can God Yahya al-Alam wa hiya Ramim? How can God revive the bones after being rotten? So we have the proposition one is true. Basically one, or God in this cases, gives life to rotten bones. Now try to argue against that. I'm going to this. B is not true. And we have to generate the premises within, and the premises is coming within the verses. It's so beautiful and so neat. It said, that which is rotten cannot come to life again. Beautiful principle. And this is reason principle for human reasoning is thinking that. Now the argument for this, that's how we try to negate these things. But at the start, that negation start collapse when basically the Quran introduced bonus must be created before they have rotten away. So their principle is basically in the logical sense, but they have to have a first creation. At the moment of creation, it has to be perceived prior to the act of being rotten or decay. Good. The one who first created them is capable of recreating them again. Well, that's God make that claim. If there is such a thing, if there is a divine being who created them, then He's capable of creating them. But could be cases where He doesn't have the skill anymore, or He has no knowledge of them. Now see, the ayah immediately treats this problem immediately. And it's like a premises for whoever created them must have knowledge of them. So the knowledge is still continue of the first act of creation. And furthermore, when it's come with the cases of heaven and this, and in premises 6, He who created heaven and earth is able to give life to Adam. So establish two conditions, the condition of knowledge and condition of capacity. And immediately it treated the problem with the premises, basically He's not capable of doing this. And of course, it's like, if you're a logician, immediately you could recognize it from 4 and 5 and 6. God is able to give life to rotten bone, therefore it is not B. Meaning you have to negate the negation, and therefore that's going to be established that, well, God can, or God gives life to rotten bones. And this is a very, very sophisticated element. All the premises I need as a logician exist in this thing. And it's given me beautiful structure of reductive absurdum. It's the most sophisticated syllogism and logic. I don't think so I will have time, but this is another beautiful thing. You can look at it. This is on Yusuf. It's also another reductive absurdum form. So my point basically, it's really, there is an element of sophistication that exists in the syllogism and the Quran, and we need further to pay attention to the traditional dialogue. I can go on and on, but I think I should stop at this point. Thank you.
So thank you very much, Ahmed and Han. So we have around 15 minutes for questions before lunch. So please, any questions, comments for Han?
Thank you very much to both panelists. I enjoyed it. Did you mention Thank you very much to both panelists. I enjoyed both your papers very much. And I had a question for the first presenter. I really like your way you describe this concept of the Quran, the speaking aside on. And I wanted to ask a question regarding your distinction between layers of the voices in the Quran. So when you just look at from the text perspective, the text claims that it's God's voice, God speaking. And then, of course, the God's voice narrating, other voices, other people speaking, even how we use questioning form. That I was able to follow. And then you made a distinction between the first level of God's voice and the narrator's voice. And I just wanted to, I was curious as to why you distinguished the two. Because why would the narrator be God from the text perspective? Because he has this element of coming down to the level of the reader and trying to engage readers better. So in that sense, we want to distinguish that. And related to that is reference to God speaking to human level and in the tradition, this idea of so
about, this is what the text says. And then there's like level B. And in this level B, here the voices change. Because so sometimes it's the opponents, sometimes it's the people of hell, the people of paradise. Sometimes it's God as well. A lot of times it's God. When the voice says, we did this, so then this is clearly God. So in this case, this is God in the top level, level A, and also in level B. But I see that in many times where in level B, when the voice is talking about God, it's difficult to say from the pronouns that it would be God's voice on level B as well. And here I consider, maybe wrong or something, but I consider this voice like the voice of the text, and I found it more interesting to call it the voice of the text is the voice of the omniscient narrator or the omniscient, all-knowing voice of the text, yeah. But it's only on level B. And I distinguish it from the voice of God and on level B because, because it says, God says this or that. So that's the reason why I make this distinction. And also I find it interesting to make this distinction because this voice is really the voice that seems to know everything about the Qur'an. So it's not a theological question. Of course, in the theological question, it's God that knows it. But because it seems to be the voice knowing about all the text, and it gives it some freedom. You know? So that's why I make this distinction on level B, but again not on level A. Yeah? I don't know if this answers your question.
So maybe Maria, and then we'll go to.
Yes, first of all, I love both papers, and my question actually was not really a question, it was sort of a comment or elaboration. When I was listening to this and trying to think about how I would characterize this, you initially described it as words that the actors on stage would speak aside, and I'm not quite sure that's it. I think the omniscient narrator comes a little closer to that, to the function, it seems, as I read it in any case. But when I think about this, I think about two things from my own personal experience. One is I'm sitting and I'm watching a film with my 5-year-old daughter, and I want to make sure that she gets the right message from the film, right? So if someone does something, and I'll turn to her and say, isn't that terrible what that person did, right? You know, this kind of thing. So it's almost as if the voice is trying to tell the reader what the proper response would be to the story that's being told, right? And the second is when I'm lecturing and I'm talking to my students and I'm going on and they're starting to fall asleep in the back. And I say, isn't that right, so-and-so? Because I want them to wake up, right? So I think those things are both there. But following up a little bit on Isra's question or comment, is it's almost as if you have the Qur'an, and I understand what you're saying, but the Qur'an is sort of speaking as itself. And the divine voice is sort of commenting on the Quranic voice, which is in a way, right, theologically God's voice, but there's also this separation. And I think that's a fascinating way to look at that.
Please in the back.
Following up on the last two questions, really, you know, in an ordinary novel that's written in the third person, sometimes it's referred to the third person as the voice of God, metaphorically. And so I'm wondering, when you're talking about the Qur'an speaking in a distinct voice, are you talking about when God refers to himself in the third person, as opposed to the first person singular, third person plural? If not, then I think we need some examples that would help us to understand better the distinction between God's own voice as opposed to God's voice.
Thank you. Yeah, of course that's a question. So it's the same as the first question about this. I don't know if this is God speaking in his third voice. It's also possible. I think maybe to try to third person, or was the intention to provide us some authoritative knowledge about who is God? So I'm not sure, I don't know. But I'm just, based on the pronouns, we said this and that, God said this and that. I feel that when it's on the third person, it makes sense, thanks to this idea that this is the omniscient narrator. But you're right that sometimes it's difficult, because sometimes it's really the beginning of the sentence where it's we said this and but God is all knowing. So it's like in the same sentence, so it's a bit tricky sometimes. But I'm not going to have a clear answer. I have my own position, but I disagree with it.
Daniel.
Sister, I just wanted to comment on the same thing, if possible.
Yeah, we'll definitely get to Daniel first.
Thank you both for this talk. And Sylvie, as you know, I'm very interested in self-referentiality. I was just wondering why you, I like the description of this as an aside, but I'm wondering why you identify it as self-referential, or did I understand you correctly?
Well, yeah, that's like the last part that I didn't really have the time to explain more. It's because those words spoken aside are like tools that make the listener or the reader do something in relation to the Quran. So it makes them apply in their own life the role of the Quran. And this role is given by self-referentiality. I don't know if this, of course it's not it depends what level of self-referentiality. If it's only saying the Quran is this and that, so the Quran is relation to Allah, the Quran is something that is came down on Muhammad, etc., etc. Or if self-referentiality also goes to the role of the Quran in everybody's life. So that's, if the Quran is also saying, I am there to tell you this and that, to do this and that. But that's how I don't know, you may disagree, especially stuff.
Maybe it's a self-consciousness rather than a self-referentiality.
Yeah. No, it's possible that you give it another meaning.
Can I just one suggestion? Listen to the other speaker. A work recently completed by Mahdi Aziz, who's a colleague of Ansari, on the Contemplating school. He works in Aix-en-Provence also on the counter-discourse, and he does precisely this kind of thing.
Oh, Mahdi Aziz.
It should be published.
Great, then we can move to Katrina.
Yeah, about the example that the professor in the back mentioned, I think my voice is loud. When you gave your presentation, I kept thinking of this verse that kept coming to my mind. It's about the Queen of Sheba. God is describing the Queen of Sheba, and the king came to her, and then she's saying, "Oh people, let me know what should I do in this situation. And if a king comes to our town, they're going to basically destroy it." And then this voice comes in all of a sudden and says, وَكَذَلِكَ يَفْعَلُونَ. And indeed, kings, if they come to a town, they will destroy it. So this example kept coming to my mind, and I think, this voice did a lot of things for me to understand the text. For one thing, it's sort of telling me God is confirming that the Queen of Sheba is really wise and she thinks properly. And this shows that women can actually take leadership positions. Because now the main argument nowadays is that women are not allowed for leadership, they cannot be, So it's like, and it's also kind of distancing that the Quran is giving you information objectively, and then reacting to it in a certain way, giving that authoritative, sound that you said, that, oh, this is right, oh, but this is not right. So I don't know if I'm getting it clear. Does that answer? I mean, that's what came to my mind when you were saying, and I felt that the example, which is actually what you said, fits perfectly to what the example is trying to give.
Just, I think you probably fits in this, but in my talk also I wanted to give to say something about the verse endings about God, like and God is and God knows best, and God is the Almighty, and whatever. All those verse endings about God, and they are not that exactly word spoken apart because they don't really break something, but they kind of end a section of the text most of the time. And I think they work the same way. They put all the stories that have just been said in a setting where, don't worry, there is God. And so, it pushed the reader to, not to worry and not to, just, in the end, that's all in God's hands. And so it puts the person or the situation, however, whatever tragic it is, it doesn't matter. It's in the end God's. So it puts puts back the whole story in this worldview, and then that's how I think it contributes to self-reflection, because it puts it all in this broad perspective.
Wonderful. We have time for one more question. Any questions for Ahmed?
Yeah, this is also related to what you said. I think about this verse.
Okay, great. So, please.
The question from Brother Ahmed is, I think with the rationalization, what we're doing here, it is kind of alluded to when Ibrahim alayhi salam is rationalizing the Tawhidic concept in his own mind in Surah An'am. So I think all those things are done by Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam to come to a conclusion. I thought maybe that could be something you can think of using that for rationalizing. That was the solution.
Well, actually, one of the syllogisms I uses was with Ibrahim in the cases when all the prophets, they have this syllogism, and Ibrahim is one of the. They have a number of syllogisms when he tried to rationalize that. Moses, for example, in the cases of when he's being challenged, God bring the people to life and make them die, and the Pharaoh basically respond, I can do the same. Well, then he responds, can you bring the sun from God bring the sun, rise the sun from the east, can you rise the sun from the west? And so the element of this the dialect is what I'm concerned about. Is really it's the appealing to human reasoning, because why there is dialect to begin with? Well, I mean, there's a number of verses in the Quran. It's just like just stated the will of God. God command X and Z and Y. But there is a number of cases there is that dialect, which is it's invited human reasoning. At the same time, we have these verses where it said like we are by nature, we have the propensity to dispute. So we already been admitted. So it's like I will not be guilty if I continue to dispute, and this could be go for an infinite regress. Every time you provide me with a reason, I will be skeptic and provide you with other things. But it has to be has to be admitted about human nature and human reasoning. So yes, there is a lot of story in Abraham and Moses, and most of the prophets actually have this dialectical disputation with the
Your final comment?
I have a question for you.
Final question.
Well, this is just when you were talking about in the symbolism when there is something implicit. So but the implicit result, not only the implicit basis, but the implicit result. I think this happened in the Qur'an when it said, if this, then this, and then stop. So in your mind you understand, then this.
clearly stated what that this is implicit in the
Yes,
premises.
because my question was then, this is very important for contemporary disputes, or to see that something is not written word by word in the Quran, nevertheless, it's there. It's implicitly a consequence. This is very tricky. How do you deal with
Yeah, but up to this point, I mean, when I look at the classic literature and modern literature, there is no argument why we use this in such a way. Whereas, like, we have in the Greek tradition, I'm not trying to say like the Greek tradition has to be significant. It's just another tradition of dialect that has been involved in. But within Greek tradition, actually within the commentary also on the Greek tradition in medieval time by Muslim philosophers like Avicenna and others, we have that they give you basically good reasoning of how to deduce certain premises, why this is premises has to be relevant to the previous one. Because you're not just like saying, well, it seems to be, I can read it from the Quran, as the Quran is stated X or C and Y. But it has to be, number one, you have to establish the index here. There is a common accepted foundation belief when there's a dialogue between the Prophet Muhammad and the Christian, for example, what they are index here. If you establish this thing, then it's easy for you to derive to deduce basically this, the attainment, which was the implicit or unstated premises. And this can be tested. I mean, it's not going to be that ultimate thing. So in the tradition of the tafsir or the tradition of Islamic law and fiqh, you have to really go after this thing and say, I mean, in the Greek tradition, there's this clear recommendation. It has to be relevant, it has to be not remote from the conclusion, and it has to become to get to the conclusion. But when you say that some of this implicit, it has to be conclusion, I'm not sure, because you can't really get an implicit conclusion. And the conclusion is supposed to be reasonable. Yes, we can deduce from that it means this. But that's after you establish all the premises has to be true, and therefore must be X. Yeah.
So please join me in thanking our yeah, exactly. I'd like to invite all of you to lunch.
لا لا